I've been solo camping for over 10 years now. I'm not one of those thrill seekers or survivalists. I just like the quiet, the stillness of being away from everything. No cars, no people, no phones buzzing every 5 seconds. It's a reset for me. This trip was no different. I'd taken a Friday off work, loaded my gear, and headed to an off-trail site in a national forest I'd scouted out 2 years ago. It's a good 5-mile hike from the nearest fire road, no cell reception, and almost no foot traffic. That's what made it perfect. I got to the site late afternoon. By sunset, I had the tent up, firewood collected, and dinner cooking over my small camp stove. Everything was calm, stars out, the kind of silence that feels like a blanket. Then I noticed the light. It was faint, maybe 100 yards out through the trees. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe moonlight catching my thermos lid or something. But then it moved, slowly, left to right, then stopped. Then it disappeared. I killed my headlamp, just to make sure it wasn't some weird trick of the beam bouncing off something metallic. But no, when I turned everything off, I could still see it. It pulsed like someone walking with a flashlight, but no beam pointed in my direction. Just the glow of the bulb. I sat still for maybe 10 minutes, watching it move through the trees, slowly circling, but never coming closer. Eventually it stopped, and then the woods went back to black. I didn't sleep much that night. Every squirrel in the leaves sounded like a footstep. Every creak of the trees was a whisper I couldn't make out. But the light didn't return, and eventually I dozed off in that half sleep where your body shuts down, but your brain won't let go. Morning felt like a relief. Sunlight always does out there. I shook it off. Probably another camper, I told myself. Or some park maintenance guy who took a wrong trail. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling. So I walked in the direction I'd seen the light. Nothing dramatic, just checking. After 100 feet or so, I found the first thing that didn't make sense, a water bottle propped neatly against the base of a tree. It wasn't mine, and it was still about 3/4 full, with a cracked label that read Hudson Springs. It hadn't been there yesterday. Of that I was sure. I called out just in case. Hey, anyone out here? No answer. I waited a beat, then another. Nothing. The rest of the day was normal. I went fishing at the creek, cooked lunch, read a bit, and prepped firewood for the evening. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had passed through. Not just passed through, though, watched. Around 5 p.m., I found the second thing. A set of footprints along the soft dirt, not far from my tent. I wear size 11 boots. These were smaller, narrower, and from a completely different tread pattern, almost like a work boot or military-style sole. They circled around my site once, then vanished off into the tree line. I considered packing up right then and there, but it was late, and hiking 5 miles out in the dark wasn't smart. So I made a fire bigger than the night before, and sat with my back to the tent, keeping the whole clearing in view. That's when I saw him. It was around 9 p.m. The fire had died down just a bit, enough that my eyes were adjusted to the dark. I caught movement at the edge of the light, just outside the circle between 2 trees. He was standing completely still, not walking, not approaching, just there. He didn't say anything. He didn't move, just stood, partially in shadow, partially lit, head tilted slightly down like he was watching something on the ground. He wore dark clothes, something like a gray jacket, and what looked like a beanie or cap. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a second. "Hello," I said, barely above a whisper. "Nothing. Are you lost?" I tried louder. Still nothing. That's when it hit me. I'd left my axe by the stream earlier. All I had nearby was a folding knife, and it was zipped inside my tent. I wasn't going to risk reaching for it. After maybe 30 seconds, he turned, slowly, and disappeared behind the trees. Not a single sound. No footsteps. No crunching of leaves. Just gone. I stayed up the entire night. Fire blazing. Eyes wide. Knife in my hand. even though I doubted it would do much if he came back. When the sun rose, I packed everything in under 10 minutes. Tent, stove, gear, all jammed into my pack without order. I was getting out, but the trail back wasn't normal. Less than a mile in, I found the first tree, freshly fallen, right across the path. Big enough that I had to climb over with effort. I figured it was bad luck until I saw the second tree. Same thing, still green, still oozing sap, clearly pushed over recently. By the third block, a thick tangle of brush and snapped branches piled across the trail. I realized it wasn't nature. Someone was trying to slow me down. I left the trail and bushwhacked the rest of the way, checking behind me every 10 steps. I don't think I've ever moved that fast with a 40-pound pack on my back. When I reached my car, I didn't check my gear. I didn't drink water. I didn't even change my boots. I drove straight out of that forest and didn't stop until I hit the first gas station with a signal. I called the local ranger office to report what happened. They said they'd send someone to check, but nothing ever came of it. No missing persons, no other reports. But that wasn't the part that stuck with me. A week later, I pulled out my gear to clean it. As I unrolled my sleeping bag, something slipped out onto the floor. It was a single strip of canvas, maybe 2 inches wide, 6 inches long, tied into a loose loop, burnt slightly at the edges. It wasn't mine, and I have no idea how it got in there. I've always liked being alone in nature. I know that's not for everyone. Some people hear solo hike and think suicide mission, but I've never had a bad experience. At least, I hadn't, until the day I heard the second set of footsteps. It was early September, the start of that crisp fall season when the woods still look alive, but you can feel them slowing down. I'd taken a week off work and planned a 4-day solo hike through a lesser-known stretch of state forest in northern Vermont. Not completely off-grid, but remote enough that I wouldn't run into anyone unless they were as deliberately alone as I was. The first day was perfect. Cool air, orange leaves, 0 bugs. I made it to a small ridge where I set up camp, overlooking a valley full of birch and pine. Cooked dinner, watched the sun go down, fell asleep to the sound of crickets and owls. Day 2 is when things got weird. I woke up early, broke camp, and started hiking toward a lake marked on my map. The plan was to reach it by mid-afternoon and set up camp there. I was moving steadily, stopping now and then to take photos of mushrooms or old trees. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then, around noon, I started hearing footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just the echo of my own steps. That happens sometimes when the trail surface changes. Pine needles can make a soft bounce back, and tree trunks can reflect the crunch of gravel weirdly. But these weren't echoes. When I stopped, the sound stopped. When I moved again, slowly, the second rhythm returned. Not in sync with mine, just a beat behind, like someone trying not to be noticed, but also not trying hard enough. I turned around. Nothing. Trail behind me was empty. No wind, no animals, just a stillness that suddenly felt heavy. I stood there for a while, scanning the tree line. Then I called out, casually, not panicked. "Hey, you out there?" Silence. I waited. Still nothing. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was just paranoia. Maybe a deer moved when I moved. Maybe a squirrel darted across branches. Either way, I pressed on. I didn't hear the footsteps again for a couple hours. Around 3:30 p.m., I reached the lake. It was a wide, dark sheet of water with a narrow bank and dense forest all around. No docks, no boats, just pure stillness. I set up my tent a few yards from the shoreline and dropped my pack. Then I froze. The footsteps were back, but this time they weren't behind me. They were to the left, coming from the trees just off the lake. 2 steps, pause, 2 more, then silence. I crouched, holding my breath. My eyes darted across the tree trunks, trying to catch movement. Nothing. but I knew someone was there. I said, louder now, "If you're hiking through, you're good to pass. Just say something." Again, no reply. The thing is, in remote areas, most solo hikers or hunters will call out to let you know they're nearby. It's a kind of unspoken code. You don't sneak up on people in the woods. Not unless you have a reason. I grabbed my bear spray and kept it nearby as I cooked dinner. I didn't unpack anything else. No fire, no shoes off, no evening routine. I just sat there, waiting for the sun to go down, ears straining for more movement. It never came, but I barely slept. Every crunch of leaves, every snapping twig had me grabbing the flashlight. At some point around 1 a.m., I swore I saw a silhouette across the lake. Not moving, just standing still. But when I blinked, it was gone. By sunrise, I had already packed. I debated heading back, but the trail looped, and I figured going forward was faster than doubling back. I told myself I'd probably imagined most of it. The woods can do that to you when you're alone long enough. Still, I moved fast. No breaks. Barely drank water. About an hour into the day's hike, I came across something that stopped me cold. Boot prints. 2 sets. One matching mine from the day before. The other, smaller, different sole pattern, and fresher. The edges were crisp, not weathered or smudged. Whoever left them had passed through no more than a few hours ago. I checked around. No broken branches. No drop gear. No wrappers or signs of other campers. Just the prints. And they followed the same direction I was heading. Now I was alert, fully. I didn't stop moving for the rest of the day. No detours. No photo breaks. I just followed the trail until my legs were sore and my shoulders ached. I reached a clearing by late afternoon, a spot I'd marked ahead of time as my next campsite. It was flat, open, and provided a clear view of any approach from the trail. At that point, visibility felt like safety. But I didn't unpack right away. Instead, I walked a wide circle around the perimeter, checking for signs. And I found them. 3 more footprints, same pattern, same direction. But this time they curved around the clearing, just behind a clump of brush. Like someone had walked to the edge and watched. That was it for me. I didn't care if I had a hike after dark. I wasn't staying another night. I pushed through another 2 hours of trail until I hit a section I recognized from day one. I was about 4 miles from the trailhead and my legs were dead, but adrenaline was keeping me going. Then came the sound that still haunts me. Footsteps. 2 sets. One directly behind me, maybe 30 yards back. The other off to the right, weaving through the trees, moving in angle. They weren't subtle anymore. Whoever it was, they didn't care if I heard. They were closing in. I didn't turn around. I didn't call out. I just kept walking, faster, then faster, until I was almost jogging. My backpack slammed against my spine with every step, but I didn't stop. I don't know how long they followed. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been 30. But eventually, the sounds faded. Either they peeled off, or they stopped moving. I made it back to my car around 7:45 p.m., just as the last bit of daylight disappeared behind the trees. The parking area was empty, just my car sitting under a yellowing security light. I didn't even take off my pack. I tossed it into the back seat, locked the doors, and drove straight to a motel 2 towns over. The next morning, I filed a report with the local ranger office. They took my name, GPS coordinates, and asked if I wanted to speak to law enforcement. I did. A deputy came by, took some notes, said it sounded like someone was maybe tracking you out of curiosity or confusion, but admitted it was strange. He asked if I got a look at anyone. I hadn't. No one followed up after that. And maybe that's the part that scares me the most. How normal it all felt. No dramatic ending. No confrontation. Just a creeping sense that someone was always right there, watching. Since then, I've only gone on 1 hike, with a group, full cell coverage, and armed with more than bear spray. But even now, walking down a crowded sidewalk, I sometimes find myself listening for that second pair of footsteps just a little out of sync with mine, like someone still doesn't want to be seen. I was kayaking solo through a long stretch of river in western Oregon, about 45 miles total. I'd done the route once before with a buddy the previous year, but this time I wanted to take it slow and do it alone. It winds through dense forest with no towns, no roads, just silence and water for miles. That's what I needed. Silence. The second day was when it all happened. I made good time on day one, stopped around 6 p.m., set up my tent on a flat bank about 30 feet from the river, made dinner, slept fine. No issues, no people, no animals besides a few raccoons nosing around. Next morning, I was back on the river by 9 a.m. The fog was still hugging the surface, curling around my paddle every time I dipped it in. The air was clean, the sky blue. Everything felt right. Then I saw the shack. It wasn't on my map. Wasn't there last time either. Just off to the right side of the river, maybe 100 feet inland, half hidden behind a wall of fir trees. The roof was rusty tin, the siding was mismatched wood, and part of the porch was sagging into the earth. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. But what got me curious was the boat. A small, aluminum fishing boat was pulled halfway up the muddy shore, with fresh drag marks still visible. Someone had used it recently. The interior was dry, but the seat cushion was indented like someone had been sitting on it not long ago. Now, here's the thing. I should have kept paddling. I know that now, but I'm naturally curious. And I'd seen enough wilderness blogs talk about old shacks used as ranger cabins, hunting outposts, or storm shelters. I figured maybe I'd find a date carved into the wall, or someone's weird collection of forest junk. I pulled my kayak up onto the riverbank, tied it to a tree, grabbed my phone for photos, and walked toward the shack. The closer I got, the more off it felt. There were signs that had been patched up multiple times. Newer nails and older boards. A section of the roof looked like it had been redone recently. A shovel was leaning against the porch railing. Fresh mud on the handle. I stepped up onto the porch and listened. No wind. No birds, just a distant trickle of the river. The front door wasn't locked. It creaked when I pushed it open. Inside was worse. It wasn't abandoned. Not really. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not rot, not mold. Just old sweat and damp clothing. The kind of smell you get if someone had lived rough for a long time. Then I saw the items. Phones. Dozens of them. Spread across a table, stacked in buckets, some smashed open. Different models, different colors, some with cases, some without. A few still had cracked lock screens lit up, showing old battery warnings. Next to the phones were wallets, neatly lined up, some men's, some women's. Most empty except for expired cards and worn photos. A couple still had cash inside, 20s and 10s folded flat, untouched. And then there were the cameras. Digital ones, GoPros, old DSLRs, some with batteries removed, others with cracked lenses. They were piled up in a wooden crate under the window, like someone had thrown them in without much care. That's when I realized these weren't forgotten belongings. They were collected. I turned to leave. Immediately. Every instinct in my body said run. But something stopped me cold. Click! The sound of a camera shutter. Behind me. But I wasn't holding my camera. It was in my pocket. I froze. No footsteps. No voice. Just that sound, clear and sharp from somewhere behind the shack. I didn't wait to investigate. I sprinted out the door, nearly slipped on the porch step, and ran toward the river. My feet sunk in the mud, almost lost my shoe, but I didn't stop. Got to the kayak, untied it with shaking hands, pushed off, paddled like hell. I didn't look back until I was 50 feet downstream. There was no one on the porch. No movement near the shack. Nothing. But when I checked my phone, shaking, sweating, I saw a new photo in the gallery. It was of me, standing in the shack, taken from the window through the broken screen. Zoomed in, slightly tilted, time-stamped 5 minutes earlier. But I was alone in that shack. I checked. I knew I was alone. Unless someone was already inside, hiding, or someone was outside, watching through the glass. Either option was enough to make my stomach turn. I didn't stop paddling until I hit the next bend in the river. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. Heart still pounding, arms sore, hands blistered from gripping the paddle too tight. I told myself to think clearly, that maybe some hunter used the shack, and the stuff inside was just salvage. Maybe the photo was old, a camera remote that had triggered accidentally. Maybe, but I didn't believe that. Not really. I checked my GPS. I was still about 10 miles from the nearest access point. Too far to paddle back. So I decided to keep going, find a safer spot to camp, and alert the rangers once I was out of the woods. But that night, things got worse. I picked a campsite on a rocky rise overlooking a fast-moving stretch of the river. It gave me a good view in all directions, and I figured it would be hard for someone to approach without making noise. I didn't build a fire, didn't cook, just stayed low, tent barely visible, every zipper sealed. Around 11 p.m., I heard footsteps. Not close, not loud, but definitely human, crunching up the slope behind me, then stopping, then shifting. Someone was trying to stay quiet. I held my breath, knife in hand, and stayed still for over an hour. The footsteps came and went, circling, waiting, but they never came closer. When the sky began to lighten around 5 a.m., I packed everything in silence and got back on the river before the sun fully rose. The rest of the trip was a blur. I didn't stop, didn't rest. I made it to the end of the route by early evening and immediately reported what I'd found. The ranger station took me seriously, sort of. They logged the location, made a note, and said they'd check it out. When I pressed for a follow-up, the officer said the area was on private logging land and technically outside their jurisdiction. He gave me a number for the county sheriff. I called. No answer. Left a message. Never heard back. Weeks later, I checked the GPS coordinates on satellite view. The shack wasn't visible. Too much tree cover. But when I zoomed out, I saw something else. About 400 yards inland, a faint square clearing. Like a large plot of land had been cleared and left to grow back. That clearing wasn't on my original map, either. I haven't kayaked since. Every time I hear a camera shutter, in a store, on a phone, even on TV, I flinch. Because somewhere out there is a picture of me, taken by someone I never saw, in a place I should have never entered. And whoever they are, they're collecting more than just phones. They're collecting stories like mine. Maybe one day someone will find the camera I dropped in the river, and maybe, just maybe, it'll have more than one photo in it. The first marker looked innocent. Just a strip of red cloth tied around the branch of a pine tree, maybe 2 feet off the ground. I figure it was part of a race trail or a hunter's marker. That's common enough. I've seen ribbon flags left behind for everything from mushroom foraging to property surveying. But I was 20 miles deep into a solo mountain biking loop, the kind that's not maintained by the park anymore. This trail wasn't part of any official map. In fact, I was pretty sure it hadn't been used in years. That's why I chose it. I'd taken a week off, packed up my gear, and drove into the northern Rockies to hit some abandoned wilderness loops I'd mapped out myself over the last couple of years. The plan was 3 days out, 2 nights under the stars, and total silence. I needed that silence. Life back home had gotten loud. The first day was perfect. Clear skies, cold air, crisp trails that hadn't seen a tire in a long time. I made good time, hit the ridgeline, and set up camp near an old fire lookout tower that had long since collapsed. I cooked a basic meal, journaled a bit, and watched the stars in total silence. Then, the next morning, just after getting back on the trail, I saw the marker. Red cloth, weathered, about 3 inches wide, tied tight to a pine branch. I didn't think much of it until I saw the second one a few hundred yards later. Then the third. All the same cloth, all tied at roughly the same height. No other signs, no numbers, no paint, just a cloth. That's when I started to wonder. See, most forestry crews mark trees for cutting with spray paint. Trail runners often use bright plastic flags, not fabric. Hunters usually keep their marks low to the ground. But these weren't low, they were at eye level. Like someone wanted to make sure I would see them. By mid-morning, I'd passed at least 10. Each one spaced out, just far enough to not feel random. I even doubled back once to check. They lined up with the trail I was already taking. It wasn't a side path. They weren't leading away from the trail. They were following it. I started to get that slow itch in the back of my brain, the one that says something's off, but you can't quite explain why. So I picked up the pace. A few hours later, I stopped to refill water at a stream. While kneeling by the bank, I caught a glimpse of something across the water. Another marker, but this time it wasn't cloth. It was a pile of rocks, deliberately stacked. 5 smooth stones balanced on a flat stump. That's an old sign, often used to mark burial grounds, or trail junctions, or hidden paths. But this one was aimed directly toward me. I could see it from where I knelt, and someone had clearly placed it to be visible from this exact angle. That's when I realized these weren't accidental markers. Someone was placing them. For me. I got up, scanned the woods, and called out, "Hey, anyone out there?" Nothing. Not even birds. The silence was different now. Not peaceful. Dead. I dried my hands and got back on a bike. I didn't stop again until late afternoon. The trail narrowed into a switchback that wrapped around a steep drop. That's where I saw the most disturbing marker of all. It was a piece of cloth again, this time black, tied to a dead tree, right at the bend. Underneath it, nailed directly into the trunk, was a tiny mirror. A makeup mirror, cracked, and in the reflection, I could see myself. My helmet, my face, and just behind me, barely in frame, the corner of another marker. That did it. I was done pretending this was normal. I got on the radio I always carry and try to reach any ranger station nearby. Nothing. No signal. No response. I took out my map and realized I was still at least 12 miles from the next road. No way out but forward. So I pushed on. Fast. Every time I saw another marker, I stopped counting. They were everywhere now. Red, black, even a few strips of yellow, like someone had started color coding. I couldn't tell what the colors meant, but they all led the same direction, deeper in. Just before sunset, I hit an old logging road. That wasn't on my map. It was newer, graveled, still packed from recent tire tracks, not overgrown. And I froze, because standing at the other end of the clearing, maybe 50 yards away, was a man. He wore brown canvas pants, a dark jacket, and held something in his hand. I couldn't tell what. He didn't wave, didn't shout, didn't move, just stood there, watching. I raised my hand, half wave. "Hey," I called out. "You okay?" Nothing. Then, slowly, he raised his arm and pointed, not at me, at the trail behind me. I turned. Nothing was there. When I looked back, the man was gone. No footsteps, no rustling, just empty road. That night, I didn't camp. I rode until it hurt, pushing through the dark with my headlamp and adrenaline. I eventually made it to an old ranger cabin that had been decommissioned years ago, but left unlocked for emergencies. I barricaded the door, stayed inside, knife in hand. Slept maybe 20 minutes total. At sunrise, I checked around the cabin before leaving. And that's when I saw the last marker, tied to the front porch railing. A strip of blue fabric this time, brand new, and underneath it, scratched into the wood with something sharp, were 4 words. "You're on the map." I don't remember how I got out. I pedaled so hard I puked on the side of the road, flagged down a pickup truck near the highway, and got a ride back to the ranger station where I'd parked. I filed a report, gave GPS coordinates, described the man, the shack, the markers. They promised to look into it. I never heard back. And 2 weeks later, when I went back online to check public forest notices for that area, the trail I'd ridden, it had been removed from the system. Not closed, not marked as unsafe, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. I'm not superstitious, and I don't scare easy. I've worked as a seasonal park ranger for 5 years now. Mostly quiet stretches in the Northwest, where the biggest threat is usually a bear getting too friendly with someone's cooler. But this shook me. It happened late October, just before winter closures. I was finishing up my final week at a small national park bordering the Cascades. The higher trails were already snowed in, but the lower ones were still open for late-season campers and hikers. My job was simple. Hike out, check permits, inspect fire rings, clean up trash, and make sure nobody got themselves killed. One trail, Timberline Loop, was rarely used. Too far out, not scenic enough to attract traffic. It weaved deep into the woods, past 2 streams and a ridge, then looped around to a backcountry campsite we called Timberline 3. It was primitive. No pit toilet, no cleared pads. Just a flat section of earth near a rock wall and a few scattered fire pits. I'd been there twice all season. No one ever stayed. Except this time, someone had. When I got to Timberline 3, I saw a tent. Faded green, maybe a few years old, with a rainfly half slipped off. That wasn't strange. People sometimes forgot to log their permits. Annoying, but not unheard of. What was strange was the smell. Not bad exactly, just stale, like old sweat, wood smoke, and something that had been sitting still for too long. I called out, "Hello, Ranger here. Anyone around?" Silence. I stepped closer. The tent door was zipped shut. Next to it, a cooking area had been set up. Single burner stove, half-empty pot of pasta, a fork resting on a tree stump. The food had crusted over, dry. Not fresh, but not old enough to rot. Maybe a day or two. There were 2 camping chairs by the fire ring. One tipped over. A pack of cards spilled in the dirt. A red mug still half full of cold coffee. Everything looked paused, like someone had been mid-meal, mid-conversation, then just stood up and walked away. I knocked on the tent pole gently. "Anyone inside?" No reply. I crouched down, unzipped the flap, and leaned in. No one. Inside were 2 sleeping bags, unrolled, 2 backpacks, a pair of boots, a phone charging from a small solar pack. Everything in its place, except the people. I radioed it in, got static at first, then a weak response from base saying they tried to reach the sheriff, but I was probably just dealing with hikers who left early without breaking down camp. Still, protocol was protocol. I was told to secure the site and wait for backup. So I waited, but I couldn't shake it, that sense of wrong. I walked a slow circle around the site, looking for clues. 20 feet behind the tent, I found a pair of trekking poles jammed into the dirt, tips down like someone had planted them there. A shirt was draped over one. Looked like it had been soaked and left to dry. Nearby, a second campfire, smaller, unlit, with burned scraps of something unidentifiable inside. Maybe trash, maybe paper. As I looped around to the front again, I spotted something that made my skin crawl. Footprints. They circled the tent. Not 2 sets, not 3, 1. Same tread, repeated. The same boot pattern walking in a slow, deliberate path around the camp, again and again. I counted at least 5 full loops. Maybe more, like someone had paced the site for hours. Just one person, but the camp was clearly set up for 2. I looked back at the chairs. One tipped, one upright, both angled slightly toward the fire. That's when I noticed the second weird thing. The firewood stack. It was too perfect. 6 logs, all nearly identical in size, arranged like ribs in a pile. And jammed into the top log, a knife. Not a pocket knife. A long, thin kitchen knife with a red handle. No sheath. just stuck there, blade down. I didn't touch it. Instead, I walked to the river, trying to clear my head. That's when I saw the tracks. On the opposite bank, directly across from camp, were more boot prints. Same pattern as the ones circling the tent. But these were staggered, spread wide apart. A trail leading upstream into the trees. Not a game trail. Not random. They were leading somewhere. I stood there for a long minute debating. Wait for backup or follow. In the end, I followed. Dumb, I know. But I had a radio, a map, and a flashlight. I figured I'd go 200 yards, tops, just to see. The trail was faint but deliberate. Whoever it was had kept to soft soil and shadows. No broken branches. No trash. Just the steady imprint of boots. I followed them for maybe 10 minutes. Then they stopped, dead in the middle of a small clearing. No campsite, no fire pit, no trash, nothing. Just a flat patch of earth and more footprints. They weren't walking anymore. The tracks formed a tight circle, then another circle inside that, and then nothing. They just stopped. No prints leading away, no trees disturbed. It was like the person had stood in place, spun slowly, then vanished. I turned and walked fast back to camp. When I returned, something was off. The tent. The flap was open. I hadn't left it that way. I know I hadn't. Inside, everything looked the same, but one of the sleeping bags was zipped up. It hadn't been before. I didn't check it. Couldn't bring myself to. I sat on a rock near the trailhead, facing the camp, watching, listening. An hour passed, then two. No one came. Finally, just before sunset, I saw a movement. A figure at the edge of the trees, 30 feet away, standing still. I stood, reached for the radio, watched. He stepped forward, just one step. I saw his face, pale, sunken, wide eyes. He didn't blink. He wasn't dirty, wasn't injured, but something was off, like he hadn't slept in days. I raised my voice. "Sir, are you okay?" No response. "Do you need help? Are you at the camp?" He blinked, slowly. Then he turned and walked into the woods. I didn't follow. I called base again. Finally got a better signal. Told her what I saw. They said backup was coming. 2 hours out. So I waited again and watched the tree lean. He never came back. When law enforcement arrived, I showed them everything. The tent, the gear, the footprints, the man. They searched the woods. Found nothing. No signs. No bodies. No more prints. They opened the zipped sleeping bag. It was empty. No one ever claimed the gear. No missing persons matched the description. A week later, the camp was still there. No one had touched it. We packed it up and logged it as abandoned property. But sometimes when I walk the trails alone, I think about that second fire pit, the one behind the tent, and the burned pieces inside. I think about the single trail of footprints pacing that camp for hours, and a man who pointed but didn't speak. And I wonder, who was the second camper? Why didn't they leave? Or maybe they did, and it's the other one who stayed.